now, Alistair.
All right. Hi, everybody in Portland. This is a real treat. So my name is Alistair Coburn, but I brought for my drink here, my name is spelled this way, so people think it's pronounced Cockburn. But these people who make this very nice port wine spend a lot of money in advertising, teaching people how to pronounce my name. So I always thank them for that. And so I will be joining you remotely with a glass of port in my hands. And this is my first, this kind of a poetry reading, and especially he tells me I get like a half an hour. I've never had a half an hour of reading poetry. So we'll see how that goes. And I'm going to share the screen because I happen to like to show the picture of the poem, because when I listen to a poem, I never like to be surprised when it ends suddenly. So it's kind of nice to know how long the poem is. And some of mine are visual poems. So I will now attempt to share the screen and we'll see if that works. So share screen, see if that all works. And then we'll start with this one. That's okay. So I will read this to you. A dream life she led. It read from left to right until it slowly turned upside down and then fell apart. Survival, she cried, and fortunately that day met a soul who lovingly put her right side up again. So that's that. And I don't know if anybody in the room, if you guys ever talk about poems that people read, or you read it twice, or you just go straight on. Maybe it would be interesting for me if anybody in the room said anything at all.
Said anything what?
If anybody says anything, ask a question, make a comment, you know, whatever strikes your fancy.
I like the beauty of the visual. It makes your eye just go crazy.
She likes the beauty of the visual. It makes her eye go crazy.
Oh, lovely. Thank you very much. So for the next one, if nobody else has a comment they want to make, I'll self-disclose that I'm an engineer, and I'm an engineer who writes poetry. So what that means is that I do engineering type of thinking, and I use engineering thoughts and then make a poem around that. So for the second one, I asked myself the question, how do potatoes make love? It was a question for me as an engineer, you know, I mean, I know about birds and bees and pollinating and things, and I was looking at tulips and bulb plants, and I go, well, they can't use birds and bees and all that stuff. So how do potatoes reproduce? How do potatoes make love? So I wrote a poem about that. That's what we engineers do. Here it is. Two potatoes groping in the dark love one another in the warm, dry earth. Their neighbors all around extend their eyes to spy, to no avail. A lump of new potato grows. More potatoes for the earth to learn to spy, to love, to make potatoes.
When did you write this, Alistair? What were you doing when you wrote this? Why were you thinking about potatoes?
So I was living in Switzerland at the time, and my wife was from Salt Lake City, and we were walking through a garden. I think it was a cornfield, and I just turned to her and I said, I don't understand how corn reproduces. I mean, I understand mammalian reproduction, but I have no idea how corn reproduces. So she told me about bees and pollens and stuff like that. And then we were later on walking through a different part of a garden, and there were bulb plants, tulips or something. And I just said, bulb plants can't use bees. So how do bulb plants do it? And then that started me on a thought. And then I picked potatoes instead of tulips is all.
I'll never look at potatoes the same way again.
Thank you very much. So in that light, the next one that I chose is more engineers doing engineering thing. And this is kind of a love poem. This is what I do when I write a love poem. Two lights of differing color, one magenta, one green, looked upon the world according to their inner. The green had pity on the other, realizing that for it the room was surely dark, and being charitable, shone the brighter. Not for many years did green notice that together they formed white. Now this is an obscure poem because it relies on the fact that you have to know your additive and subtractive color wheels, which many people don't. When you do paints, if you put opposing colors together, you get black. That's why when you mix paints, everything gets darker. But when you mix lights together, everything gets lighter. And it turns out that magenta and green are two opposite colors. So if you have a green light, it can't see a magenta light because magenta just is black to a green light and green is black to a magenta light. So I maybe should have explained that before the poem, but this is one of those, you know, sort of how an engineer thinks about love poems. So I'll just show you that one again. Two lights of differing color, one magenta, one green, looked upon the world according to their inner. The green had pity on the other, realizing that for it the room was surely dark, and being charitable, shone the brighter. Not for many years did green notice that together they formed white. That's not the most obscure science poem I have, but maybe obscure enough.
It's a very indirect love poem.
Yeah. So here's another one, a different variety. The big lovable thing crawled out of the dark, encircled his body, climbed onto his lap while he cowered. It kissed him and held him, enveloped and caressed him, though he shivered and shrank and grew faint. Then he giggled and chuckled and laughed and guffawed. He laughed through the kisses and laughed through the hugs, till the big lovable thing, its tenderness shattered, feeling hurt and rejected, slithered off.
Do we know what the big lovable thing was?
Well, this was something, I pick poems that are particular moments of sensation, particular moods or something that I see and I try to recapture. So what would have happened here is probably in my younger days when I was more of an engineer, I would have had a girlfriend or my wife who was busy being cuddly and I was busy being not cuddly at the time. And what occurred to me, wouldn't have happened in my real life because I'm not that way. But the way to reject tenderness is to laugh at it. And so that generated that particular poem. You guys still there?
We are.
Nobody's no. You've heard lots of newbie poems in your life, I can tell. All right, this was one of the first poems that I ever wrote. And it's copyrighted 1985. And I started writing poems because I was living in Berlin and trying to learn German. And there was no internet in 1985. And so I think the English part of my brain just kind of like went wild because it never heard any English for a month. And I just started writing poems like 3 or 4 or 5 a day. And this was probably, you know, the 5th or 6th poem that I ever wrote. So this is what I was writing like in those days. Every story has two sides, except this one. This one has three. Your side, my side, and the truth. As seen by my friends, your friends, the police, my lawyer, your lawyer, the judge, the jurors, well, some of them, the press, the other press, the Evening Inquirer, my mother and your mother crying together apart, the man in the bar reading it to his friends, the foreign masses, Pravda, and me 10 years later. Every story has two sides except this one. This one has three.
Makes me want to know more.
Yeah, so a lot of these, I just trap a thought that crosses my mind. It's just an image or a thought. And then I literally try to, in the most literal way I can, describe the thought that just crossed my mind. In my case, I can never rework a poem. I have a picture in my head. I start writing. I get about 30 minutes. It's malleable. Then it starts hardening. And after about 40, 45 minutes, it's gone. Whatever the image was is gone. And I've reworked some of them for years and years and years. And I look at them, the original, the reworked one, years later. The reworked one's never particularly better than the original. So I just always keep the original. And I don't put titles on them. People have tried to make me put titles on them. It's just the image that's there. So now you've had a bunch. Let me see. I'm going to go pick maybe out of a different sequence. Here's another one that's a punctuation poem. When I submitted it to a contest, the judge said, "Oh, that's kind of cute. You should try something with commas." Thinking that it was an assignment in a class to use exclamation marks. And of course it wasn't. I had a thought that crossed my mind and I was just trying to capture it. And it happened to be needing exclamation marks and question marks in this particular pattern in order to capture the thought that I had. Frustration is trying to release some pressure, some from within pressure. Please, it seems from without, though I know it's within. Why can't you loosen it? Can't for me, please.
That's nice.
So you see, it makes no sense. Oh, that's nice. Can you do something with commas? You don't start from exclamation marks. You start from whatever you've got. All right, let's see. Let's see, I'll jump to this one here. I had a thought about ethics. So this is as an international traveler, my take on ethics. So I've basically written about everything that I can think about. So if you pick up a topic or a thought, I probably have a poem about it. Here we go. White man comes. White man goes. White man takes the earth, breaks the earth, breaks himself, goes. Home is wherever white man feels. When this earth is broken, this life is broken, this man is broken. Home is always somewhere else. White man comes, white man goes. This man must stay. All right, shift gears. This is the only one. Go.
Alistair, are you using something like HyperCard to store these things?
No, you know what I did to make this reading go pretty simple is I have a PDF of all of my poems. I just put them in Word and then I just hit print. And in this case, I took screenshots of all of the ones I wanted to read. And I'm just using the ordinary viewer and I just stacked them all up and I gave them names from 00 to 13.
Mm.
So I could go catch the ones I wanted and, right?
Okay.
This one is the only one that I've titled, and I would prefer not to have a title on it. But if I don't put a title on it, I think nobody will get it. I was sitting in a coffee shop. This is the kind of thing, how I write the poems. I'm sitting in a coffee shop, and I just happened to be looking at the ashtray. And this is what crossed my mind when I looked at the ashtray, so I wrote it down as fast as I could. So I won't read the title. I touched your mouth once. Fresh I was then, and fresh your mouth. We tasted each other. You breathed me deep into your lungs, your blood, your heart. I lived from your breath. Life was so sweet, so hot, so strong. I was your dreams, your hopes. I lived for you. You were my only. I never touched another. But you tasted many. Time took my taste, took your taste away too, and took us both away, our ways. I am dry and gray, ashes in a tray, a memory in you, a memory of you, until they tip me out and wipe it clean. What will they do when you get dry and gray? Will they tip you out too?
I think I'd call out some regrets.
I couldn't hear that. Could someone say?
She said, I think I'd call that one regrets.
Interesting. Interesting. It's pretty common that I find that I'm writing about two things at once. So at the time I was writing it, I thought I was writing it about a cigarette. But of course, the moment you read it, you see lovers crossing in time and all kinds of things. I once wrote a poem about a dewdrop evaporating from the field, or something like that. I can't remember. And I read it, and this established poet says, "Oh, that's a nice love poem." I said, "That's not a love poem. It's about a dewdrop or something, right?" He goes, "No, it's a love poem. Look at it." And then I looked at it and said, "Oh, it's a love poem. Yeah, I guess. Sorry." So I don't know. You know, when I write these things, I think that they're about something, and then later I sometimes find they're about something else. All right, I've got a couple. Here's there's maybe three more that I think are worthwhile picking up. This is a long one, and Jean requested it, and I'm quite happy with it. So I will blow it up and read this long one. I am a defender of the oppressed, not those with burqas who are so oppressed. Not that all with burqas are oppressed, for they have champions, however inadequate, however in need. Not the poor, nor the handicapped, nor the white, nor the black, the red, the yellow, the sick, the dying, the newborn, the unborn, for they all have voices, still not sufficient, still in demand. But for the artists, the musicians, the mimes, the dancers, the people without words, for whom words are not a thing, antagonized, minimized, oppressed by the philosophers, the lawyers, the rule makers, the system, who think words are all, who use words to declare that words are all, and those without words aren't. While the dancers, the musicians, the sculptors, the mimes dance, sing, sculpt, and play their experience of the world, that rich, so much wider world they inhabit without words. So richer than the impoverished world of the constructed words that imprison them, remove the validity of their world, declare them empty. While the painters, the drummers, the dancers see, feel, hear, move the vastness of the world without words. I am words. defending them.
That's beautiful.
What prompted you to write that, Alistair?
My wife was an artist, a sculptor, and it was very clear to her that she lost in all arguments because arguments are based out of words. And then kind of starting from there, I started to see how, particularly, I think I was reading some philosophy course or some philosophy text. And it occurred to me that the philosophers were all middle-aged white men who used words. And if you got out of the middle-aged white men word-oriented category, you had totally different views of things. And I watched a couple of theater people trying to describe the play that they were doing. And they got so excited, they were jumping up and down with excitement, but nothing came out of their mouths. They couldn't do anything with their excitement. And that sent me down this path, and I've been on this path for, decades now. And just one day I saw something online, somebody who was a words person was attacking somebody who wasn't a words person. And I just said, okay, stop, I'm going to do this, right? So that's how that happened. I'm a kind of sucker for defending people who don't have defenders. All right, we're getting near the end. I'm trying to think of ones that are interesting. This one here is important. That one is important. I have two more, I think, that are important to me. Let's just see here. So this one is another one of these kind of nonverbal types of things that had an interesting, it was just a thought that crossed my mind, as all of these are. So let's just go see what it says. That little grimace you just made across the dinner table speaks volumes to me, though it says nothing to the others around us. You twisted your lips like that yesterday to show how you felt about that fellow who had behaved so awfully when you were trying to be nice. I quite agree. Actually, he rather reminds me of the man on your left. I raise my eyebrows a hair and glance lightly in his direction. From the stiffening of your top lip as you continue to chew, it is clear you think so too. Uh-oh, we've been spotted. No matter. Our conversation, although discovered, will have no meaning to anyone else. And the poor man on your left will always suffer from the label we gave him in this short conversation.
So I think this poem really makes clear how poetry requires a different kind of attention when you read it, because some people may have missed that there was not a word said. There's so much packed in around the words in poetry.
Right.
There's no filler, there's no transition, there's just image, there's just meaning.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, that gets me now to the last one that I'm going to read won me a little award in the first Utah State Poetry Competition that I wrote, and we can discuss its meaning maybe afterwards, but I just want to read it without preamble, as it should be done. As a broken winged bird, she fell, rushing down to meet the world, recalling that moment, that push against the soft wall of balance, stepping onto nothing, her throat catching, trying to stay behind, her lungs clutching their last fill of air, then falling, trying to breathe the wind, air pressing back her face. At last, she stretches out to embrace the speed, as a hawk hits form, diving upon its prey, and no longer knows the moment of letting go.
Knows the moment of letting go. Is this really a poem about a bird?
No, of course not. Things never are. So the backstory behind this, and I'm curious where other people went with it, you know, when I was reading it. I was at a swimming pool, and this was just after I had stopped working for a big company and started my little consulting business for me. Anyway, but I was sitting there and watching at the pool, watching the people go off the 10-meter platform. And I was trying to imagine that moment just after they leave the platform. I was literally attempting to describe simply one moment. There's, you know, most of my poems about describing one moment. See if I could catch that moment. And there's like 3 moments. If any of you've been off of a high board, right, where you're afraid to go off. I assume people in the room have done that. And there's this moment where you almost are going to go and you can't go and you can't go and you can't go. And there's this, like this wall, right? And you keep rocking back and forth and you're not going and you're not going. And then there's this other moment when you just like break through the wall and it doesn't matter what you do, you can't go back, right? There's this like panic moment because just right now, you know you're going. You can't save it. And then there's this other moment, right? You know, right after that, you're just starting to fall and you don't know anything. And it's the moment after that that I wanted to capture as I was watching these people dive, right? So there's the push against the soft wall of balance, stepping onto nothing, her throat catching, trying to stay behind. You know, it's a 10-meter board. It's a long fall. You have time to breathe, right? So her lungs clutching the last fill of air. And then that moment right then, when you're uncomfortable, you haven't got a shape, right? You're not aerodynamic. You're just that moment of going off, right? You're gone. But nothing's happened yet. It's just like, I don't know what. And that's what I was trying to write the poem. And then later, of course, when you get a good form going and you're about to hit the water, you know, it's all over. It's, you know, everything's good and you know, whatever. So that's how I write my poems. I was literally trying to describe that moment just after, you know, when the person goes off the board. What I didn't realize for a year, it took a year, and I realized that I was writing about me starting my consulting company. Because it was like less than a month after I had, you know, quit my job and officially declared myself a consultant. And I am there, and my body evidently chose this metaphor of that moment of stepping off the board to describe my inner sensation of the fact that I had just quit IBM. I didn't have any business yet. I didn't have any clients. I was just at that, it was no going back. It was exactly that same moment that I was trying to describe coming off of the board.
It's all about freedom.
Right.
So we're actually a little over time. Have you read the poem that you put in Agile Software Development?
I did. That was the Grimace poem.
Okay, good. That one needed to be recorded.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Good. So there it is. That's been a half an hour, and I used up all the time, and you guys were really polite, and I thank you very much.
Anyone have questions? Or?